I say this all the time. The coolest thing about Star Citizen is that it attracts so many different people with interests in different parts of the game. There's truly something for everyone. Or there will be. For me, above everything else, it is the flight experience. Whether zero-G or atmospheric flight, experiencing how the different ships all behave differently, with pros and cons, depending on how you treat them and where you take them. That's my jam. And that's why, with this video being the first, I'm starting a new Star Citizen video series surrounding everything to do with the Star Citizen flight experience. In general, these videos will be a little shorter than my Why Play Elite series. I'll be aiming to keep them short and to the point as I share my vision, ideas, and opinions on everything on the subject. Today, to kick things off, we're talking VTOL. Again. Having talked about VTOL before and listening to the inputs of others, I've come to what I think is my final conclusion on how I'd like to see the VTOL system improved and working in the future. But first, let's talk about how the VTOL system works currently and what some of the drawbacks are that are introduced. VTOL, standing for vertical takeoff and landing, is used on some ships, like the MISC Reliant series and the Anvil Terrapin, to name just two examples of many. The concept is that by the press of a button, you can rotate the main engines down in relation to the ship's normal orientation to support their ability to hover in higher gravity situations. Typically, VTOL will be required only when gravity is too high or ships are fully laden, meaning that in some conditions, these ships might also be able to hover even without VTOL, simply by using its maneuvering thrusters. In-game, right now, the primary issues I see are the inconsistent usage of the tool. In some cases, like the Anvil Terrapin, you press a VTOL button and the engines rotate. It's an involved and instant process that requires very conscious decision-making on when to enable or disable the tool. In other cases, like the MISC Reliant series, the VTOL button does not affect the angling of the thrusters, but instead it is a delayed and automated process that occurs only when you lower the landing gear. There is no manual way of angling the thrusters on demand, which makes the entire system rather slow, inconsistent, and less optimal in terms of usage. Now, before we move on to my suggestions to improve the system, let's check out two ships that do something rather interesting. Here's an RSI Aurora. Check out the maneuvering thrusters installed on the side of the ship. You notice how they rotate and orientate themselves depending on demand? Strafe up and they point down. Strafe down and they point up. Very clever. This is the Cartual, which features a similar system for the main thrusters. The main thrusters will angle themselves to provide additional thrust in both the lateral and vertical axes. They adjust themselves based on demand. Now, I know that currently this does not extend further than a simple animation. The thrust is always readily and instantly available in each direction, and the thruster animation just follows you to give you a fake impression of how this thrust is generated. So here is my suggestion. We could decide to retain the ability to manual toggle VTOL, we all like options, but let's for a moment imagine that we no longer do this. Instead, the angling of the VTOL thrusters is done automatically, on demand, based on thrust input. Are you hovering still? The VTOL thrusters angle themselves so that they can provide optimal thrust, downward. Are you starting to add strafe forward or main thrust? The VTOL thrusters rotate themselves now at a limited rate to provide more forward thrust on demand. Are you trying to stop again? The VTOL thrusters angle themselves back, again at a limited rate. And because they can only do this at a limited rate, you might need to pitch up a little to more quickly get the VTOL angles to provide optimal thrust to avoid sinking. Not only does this automated system make it incredibly intuitive and easy to use, it is immersive. It makes sense, and introduces a natural ramp up to thruster strengths in terms of providing some ships with insane strafe-up power. Now that this power is not readily available on demand anymore, but instead that power ramps up slowly as the VTOL thrusters angle themselves into position. I think for ships that use VTOL capability, this will create a really cool and interesting flight characteristic. When hovering still, their conversion to forward flight requires a gentle ramp up and vice versa. So, let me know in the comments below what you think of this idea and what else you'd like me to talk about in future episodes. Personally, I'd like to talk to you about and compare some ships that are shaped more optimally for aeroflight versus zero-G flight, their control services, and how this all might impact future gameplays. Alright, thanks for listening, and I will see you out there in the verse.